Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the webinar. We're going to be talking about new student onboarding, managing post-admit items in CRM Recruit. Just as a little bit of an introduction, my name is Malone, and I'm an associate director here in the CRM practice at Ferrilli. I've been in higher ed for a little over 20 years and have been consulting for a little more than 7. I kind of come from the admissions enrollment area and have a lot of experience in that space. Just happy to be here with you all today, sharing a little bit about a little bit of a custom creative solution that we've put together to help manage these post-admit items in Recruit. So to get the discussion started today, just kind of want to lay out a little bit of background and kind of set the stage. We want to talk a little bit about the need here. So as we all know, the enrollment process doesn't end when students are admitted. In fact, often there are additional requirements that need to be completed before a student can officially matriculate. Some of those items could include things that are on this list, things like advisor appointments or agreements of various types, background checks, certifications, final high school transcripts, licenses, even things like new student orientation, residency documentation, etc. All of those things are fairly typical items that might be required after a student is admitted, but before they actually start attending. Certainly are more items that could be included on this list, but this is just kind of to give you an idea of some of the things that could be a part of this process. So how are institutions currently gathering and tracking this documentation? Well, some are doing it through spreadsheets, and some are using reports, and sometimes we're even utilizing email, right? Just emailing these documents back and forth and kind of keeping track of them that way. Or sometimes we might have a third-party system, or maybe you're using the ERP or something like that to track this information as well. I think what we can all agree on is that any of these options are not really the ideal situation, and kind of leave a little bit left to be desired in terms of the experience, both for staff and students. So let's talk a little bit about the solution. So today what we're going to be talking about is how do we leverage CRM Recruit to assign, manage, and update students on the status of these post-admit items. So when we talk about these post-admit items, and as we think about the setup and how we actually create the solution, for these post-admit items, we are going to utilize the supplemental item records. These are things which everybody commonly would kind of know. This is kind of how we gather things like transcripts and test scores and essays and recommendations. And so we're actually going to leverage that exact same entity to gather these items as well. In order to kind of keep things straight in the system, though, we don't really want to muddy the water with these kind of post-admit items with the application items. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a unique supplemental item type to just clearly distinguish these onboarding or these post-admit items from the other supplemental items. In this particular case, and you'll see it throughout the presentation, we kind of refer to these as onboarding items, but these could be enrollment items or post-admit items or whatever name you want to give it. It's just a way to kind of distinguish it and to keep those lists separate. So one of the first steps that would happen as a part of this process is that we have to identify the items that we want to assign to particular students. So there's a couple of different assignment methods that can be used. We're going to kind of talk about those here really quickly. First is what I would kind of classify as a more simple assignment method. This is where we would utilize a workflow. We would have conditions in that workflow to basically assign the onboarding items based on established criteria. Just as an example, you might think of this as being first-time freshmen are going to get assigned 5 items, and then maybe transfer students only have 3, and maybe a returning student only has 1. But that would just be kind of a fairly simple way to make these assignments happen. Then there is what I kind of call basically a more dynamic assignment method. And this is where we are going to actually assign these items using a configuration record. So what I mean by a configuration record is that there's going to be a record inside of the system that as that workflow fires, we're going to reference that record to see what actually needs to be assigned to the student. So instead of the logic being in the workflow, the logic or the rules and the criteria are actually going to be in the record, that's what's going to help drive the assignment process. For our example here, we're calling this an onboarding packet, which kind of mimics what the school was using previously. They had basically a collection of documents and items in an email that they would send out, and they kind of refer to it as the onboarding packet, and we just kind of retain some of that terminology. But you could literally call this configuration, whatever makes sense to you. But in this particular case, we're kind of refer to it as an onboarding packet. So here is a screenshot of what an onboarding packet looks like at one of the institutions where we've implemented this solution. You can see in the upper the upper left-hand corner that we have a name of our packet. We have a link of the program, the processing team that's associated, and also the onboarding deadline. Just to call out a few things here, for this particular school, there were actually different teams that would review and validate these documents based on the program and based on the campus location. So for these particular packets, like every single one of them could potentially have a different processing team that was responsible for that. And for the onboarding deadline, this is just a configuration that we had in place so that we can dynamically set the due date for the items that get assigned as a part of this onboarding packet. The next thing I just kind of want to draw your attention to, kind of in the middle and the right-hand sections. So basically what we've done here is we've created fields that will help us to track the requirement level of the items that are in this packet. So whether it's a background check or it's an immunization or if it's a drug screen or it's an agreement of some sort, we have fields in the packet which basically tell us, is this item required, yes or no? We also have some fields in the packet where when the description that we want to display on the CX side might potentially be different from packet to packet or program to program. This just gives us the flexibility of actually displaying a customized description based on the item that's chosen. And again, all of that configuration is housed right here. One of the other things I'll draw your attention to is there's a little communication section over on the left-hand side. And this is not to say that every single configuration that you do is like this. This is certainly a more robust, really fully fleshed out sort of version of this. But in this communication section is where we're actually able to track and designate for that initial welcome email that gets sent and for the reminder emails that get sent, like when is that process going to start? How frequently do those things occur? This is just kind of the bottom part of this form. You can see that it is fairly large. But one of the things I wanted to draw your attention to here is that based on the criteria, again, of program and location, this is how these onboarding packets get assigned at this particular institution. So we've included subgrids on this form down at the bottom, which you can see kind of a listing of some of the programs that are there as well as the location. And so as a part of the process where we actually assign this packet, the workflow that does that work will actually reference the data that's listed here to make sure that it's matching both the program and the location correctly. We'll talk about that a little bit more later too. Okay, so let's start just jumping into the actual onboarding process itself. So when onboarding is set to begin, there are some background processes that are going to take some steps for us. And here's what's going to happen. It's going to assign the onboarding items, right? Again, either by that simple method or by the more dynamic method. It's also going to update a custom field that we have, which is called the onboarding status, which is where we're tracking where they are in the onboarding process. We're also going to update the onboarding items not completed, which essentially is a counter for us. It's literally just going to count how many of the items that we've assigned to a student are still pending and outstanding. And then we're also going to send the initial onboarding email. So just to kind of give you a sense of what this looks like in one of the client environments that we've done this for, here is a screenshot. So as you can see, we've got a section for onboarding status where we're able to track that onboarding status. We've got a reference of the packet that was assigned. We see that counter, right, of the number of items that are sitting out there that are pending and outstanding. And if you look at the subgrid on the right-hand side of the screen where it says onboarding items, you can total up the number of items there and you can see that there are 6 items that are in that not received status, so you know that that onboarding item is not complete, and the number of items that are pending outstanding is a direct match. Also, too, just kind of want to point out that there's another section here where we actually capture some of those important status dates that we want to track. Things like when the initial email was sent, when that last reminder was sent, and even when the onboarding process has been completed. So next, just kind of wanted to show a little bit of an example of what that initial onboarding email could look like. Your text obviously is going to be, is going to be yours. So based on institution, this text is going to change. But one of the things we wanted to demonstrate or kind of show off here is that as a part of this email, you can actually include a listing, a table, right, of those specific items that are required, as well as their item status and a deadline, and even an item message if you wanted to do that. We also kind of highly encourage that as we're kind of asking students to come back in and kind of re-engage with this onboarding process, that we also give them some instructions about, where to go and how to access this information. So that's where you can kind of see that at the bottom. We're kind of redirecting them back to the CX and giving them some of those kind of quick instructions, right, about how to find this list there. So prior to the student being admitted and prior to the onboarding process really starting, this is what the supplemental item page would look like on the CX, right? We'd have a listing of items that you would traditionally think of as being a part of someone's application process. We've got transcripts and resumes and essays and recommendations. Now, at the point that we actually start the onboarding process, we also have a little workflow that runs in the background, and this workflow essentially queries the application-related supplemental items that are out there on the student's record. It actually inserts a little snippet of code in the web external description of that item, and what the CX is able to do through some custom JavaScript that we've applied. The JavaScript is able to see that custom code and essentially hide those application supplemental items. So again, when the onboarding process starts, these are the onboarding items that are going to be created, and these are the onboarding items that are going to display for the student. This was kind of a really important piece for us, and this was one of the challenges that we talked about very early on. We really didn't want these application items and the onboarding items to kind of get intermingled and kind of mixed up. We just felt like that would just create a bit of a muddy, like not clear process for the student. So we wanted to provide, I guess, the scenario in which students would be able to come to a listing and they wouldn't have to dig and sort and kind of figure out, but that it would be a pretty concise list, and that would make sense and would be something that would be easy for them to follow. So this is just a really good example of how we utilize some custom code and some custom JavaScript. Those application supplemental items still exist. We didn't do anything with them. It's not like we've removed them or deleted them. They still exist in the system and still exist technically on the web front end or the CX. We've just used some custom code to hide it, and then to only display those items which are kind of pertinent to the student at this point in the process. So taking another step further, let's go ahead and take a look at how we would actually manage these these onboarding or these post-admit items. So if I'm the student and I get that welcome email and I log back into the CX site and I come and I find my onboarding items, I might come out to the first one. Maybe it's the COVID-19 vaccination, and I'm going to upload a copy of my COVID vaccination card, right, as my documentation. So I click on the choose file button, I navigate out, I select the file, the image, the PDF, whatever that I want to upload, and I go ahead and upload it here. So upon clicking the upload button, typically the student at this point would see the submission status of just received. But in this particular case, one of the things we also wanted to do was provide some more granular statuses to give the student just a better idea about where this item truly is in the process. So standard, right, those submission statuses would be not received, received, and waived. But again, we wanted to provide a little more detail in terms of the status of these items. So in this particular case, the student would actually see received under review. Now, the status could be anything that you want it to be. It could just be under review. You can certainly add more statuses to this as well if you want. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But here, this is what the student would see in this particular client's environment. So again, talking a little bit more about these custom item statuses, very similar to the way that we hid the application items. We kind of use a similar process where when that custom status is updated or changed on the record, we actually insert a little bit of code into that web external description, and we use some JavaScript, which essentially says, okay, I see this custom status that you want to display, and we basically overwrite what the CX would display, and we just display it. We just display the custom status instead. So again, some of the additional statuses that we created for this particular process was under review and completed and needs additional information. Based on your use case and your scenario, you certainly could add more statuses to this, but we felt like this was sufficient for the process that we wanted to put in place. One of the other components that was a big part of the development process was trying to think through how we were going to manage these these post-admit onboarding items that were coming through. A lot of these items need someone's sight, someone's attention on them to make sure that the thing that the student uploaded is, actually meets the criteria of what we're looking for. So we created an onboarding dashboard. And again, just kind of wanted to display, a bit of an image here just to kind of give you an idea of what could be on this dashboard. Certainly your dashboard could look a little bit different, than this, but there are some key components that we think are really important here that I want to point out. First, there in the upper left-hand corner, there is a section called Onboarding Items Under Review. This section is meant to display any of those items that are submitted online where that status is under review. This means that, again, we need to put eyes on this item. We need to take a look at the attachment. We need to actually validate that what the student uploaded, that it meets the criteria of what we were looking for. If it does, we're able to go in and update that item accordingly. There's also a section just to the right, which is called Items Needing Additional Info. We're going to talk about that just a little bit more. But as you might expect, this is going to show and display for us those items where it maybe didn't quite meet the criteria, and we just need a little bit more information from the student to check that one off the list. We can also display graphs and charts, right, to show where students are in the onboarding status process, and that's kind of what the chart there is on the lower left-hand side. We can also display lists of students where we're really nearing that kind of onboarding deadline or the start of the term, and we want to make sure that those students have everything in. So here, we have an example of a list where we're showing students that, they're within 7 days of the start, but it could be 14 days or 30 days or, whatever time frame that you wanted to make it. We also have a view on here where sometimes we might, get the onboarding process started for someone, but for some reason, maybe a packet didn't assign correctly, or this is a little bit more of a QA kind of item for us, just to make sure that if someone starts the process, that they have everything that they need. And again, your dashboard could look a little bit different, but some of these components we kind of feel like are pretty key to making this process run smoothly. So let's take a closer look at the dashboard, and let's jump in and take a look at this items under review section. So if I'm a staff member, this might be a dashboard that I monitor on a regular basis. And as students are submitting things through the web front end, the CX, those items would appear here, right? Just like we saw in our test a little bit earlier. So if I click on this item to take a closer look, right, it'll open up the supplemental info submission form. Again, this is internally inside the Recruit console. So as you open up the item, this is one of the sections on that form. You can see that we've added some new fields here, right? We've added some custom statuses and the item deadline. We've added some reviewed by and review date fields, right? So some of these elements, may exist, as a part of Ellucian's delivered solution, but some of them have been custom things that we've added as well. Now, as I come through and as I look at the attachment, right, I'm going to go down and I'm going to find that attachment. I'm going to open it up. And as I look at that attachment, if it truly does meet the criteria of what we're looking for this item, then I'm going to mark this item received, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of do that now. So this item is not only received, but we're marking it complete. And when we mark it complete, there's a couple of things that happen. Number one, you see that item status has been changed to received complete. We also have a workflow process in the background that updates the reviewed by and the review date. Again, these are just kind of extra add-on things that which help us to know who was the person, who was the user who actually performed the review and kind of signed off on this saying that the item was done. So once we've marked that item as being received complete, if we go back out to the opportunity record, again, this is kind of where we're housing a lot of this information for the onboarding process. If we go back out to the opportunity record in the opportunity status field, right, again, we're going to see that counter update. Previously it was 6, now it's 5. If you look at the onboarding item subgrid there on the right-hand side, right, you're going to see that, yes, that COVID-19 vaccination is received complete. And we actually see the submission dates and all the other detail that's there as well. Those little updates that we're talking about, like going back and updating, that's going to happen every single time that one of these items is received or waived. So with each of these items that gets done, right, we're going to constantly be checking and to see are all of the items completed yet, and is it ready essentially to say that the onboarding process is complete. So it's kind of an important part of this process, right, that we have kind of going on in the background all the time. We're kind of constantly checking as we're updating and managing these records. So going back out now to the CX site, right, we can kind of see what the student would see. So again, kind of giving that more granular, detailed view of where the student is in the process. So as the student uploads their item, they're going to see that that item is under review. As the staff member actually reviews it and makes some decision on it, the student is also going to see the outcome of that as well, right? So it's not just going to be, was it received, but it's, okay, well, was it good? Did it suffice? Like, is anything else needed? When the student comes out to the CX site and they see this received complete status, right, they should have a pretty clear indication at that point that all is good and things are good to go. Okay, so let's take a look at another scenario. Let's say that, I'm the student and I go out there and I'm on the CX site and I process another document, right? I upload another document, but this time it's for my health insurance. So this time when that item gets set, right, we see that the item status is under review. Let's go ahead and click into that record to check that one out. And so as we get into the document, or as we get into the record, we're going to come back to this status section. Now, again, we're going to look at the attachment just like we do every time, right? Again, we're going to be checking it to make sure that it meets the requirements. In this particular case, though, it didn't meet the requirements, right? The stuff that the student submitted just simply did not meet what we were looking for. So in this particular case, we're not going to mark it as reviewed complete, but we're going to use one of our other statuses, which is reviewed needs additional information. So when we change the item status to review needs additional information, there's an additional box or section that's going to appear at the bottom of our custom form here. And essentially what this is going to do is this is going to prompt us to put in some text that's ultimately going to be used to send the student a personalized email about this document. So here we say, the insurance card that you uploaded is expired. Please upload a copy of your new insurance card. Okay, so upon filling this out, upon saving this record, right, as long as that item status is set to needs additional information and we've got some text in this personalized message, as we save out the record, this is going to actually trigger an email notification to the student with our personalized message included. Now, here is what that personalized message looks like. Again, largely configurable by you, but one of the things that we thought was just really important, right, is that as staff members are managing and going through this process, potentially for lots of items, at one time, we really wanted to kind of create a streamlined process for them to be able to provide some feedback to the student. So instead of having to, navigate back out to the opportunity or to a person record and having to take multiple clicks to actually facilitate an email, this was kind of our solution for how to make that communication happen and happen, pretty quickly and pretty easily. So you can see here in the screenshot, right, that most of the text of this email is kind of preset. It's already preset in the workflow process, but it's that personalized part of it, right? That paragraph there that you kind of see in the red box. That is the part that's kind of dynamic about this. Now, one of the things I will note, one of the questions that's come up and people have asked about this before is that, what happens if someone submits an item, for a second time and it still doesn't meet the criteria? Well, one of the nice things about this process that we set up was that every time that personalized message gets updated, it will send out a new message to the student, right? So even if the student submitted their item, we told them that it wasn't right, a couple of weeks go by and you're back in that record, you could easily just update that personalization message again, and it would send them a new reminder, a new update. So let's go back out to our onboarding dashboard, right? When the student first uploaded their item, it falls under the review section. When we update it to the fact that it needs additional information, you're going to see that it's going to flow into that right section, right? Kind of where we would expect for it to go. Now this item is going to sit there until the student does something, or until maybe they email us and we end up changing the status, or maybe they re-upload something. So let's just pretend for a moment the student goes back out to the CX, right? This is what they would see on the CX. They would see that this item is, needing some additional information. Let's just pretend for a moment that they go ahead and they re-upload some document from here. So from doing that, as soon as they upload their new document, that item that was in the needs additional information section is going to flow right back on over to the under review section. And this is really important, right? Because as we're communicating with students about these things which are still needed, when they do something that needs to kind of re-get our attention, we want to kind of move it back into the appropriate spot so that we know, great, there's something new here that needs to be reviewed. So we would go in, we would take a look at that new attachment, and then we can update the status as appropriate. So let's take a minute here, just really quickly, and talk about onboarding reminders. Reminders are an important part of this process, just like it would be for, kind of keeping students updated and keeping them reminded about things that they need to do for their application process. This process is really no different. So reminder emails are facilitated via workflow. We've thought about using a couple different avenues to kind of accomplish this, but we just felt like workflows just seemed to work the best and give us the greatest amount of flexibility. We also utilize a workflow schedule to make sure that these reminder emails are starting at the appropriate time. Just a really important thing to talk about really quickly is that, sometimes students may get admitted really quickly in the process. If you're admitting students for the fall, sometimes they're getting admitted, months and months and months in advance. And so depending upon the institution, depending upon your cycles, right, we didn't want to assume that everybody's going to want to just start the onboarding process as soon as someone's admitted. So we do have some things in place where we can kind of put a little bit of a delay on the start of these reminders and even the welcome message for onboarding. So we do utilize a workflow schedule where we're able to kind of essentially calculate like when these things are supposed to kick off and just have those processes start at the right time. So again, these reminder emails can begin on a calculated date. A lot of times we're using a calculated field of some sort, right, to kind of create that date. And usually it's X number of weeks before the start date of the program or the start of the term, something like that. And again, the frequency of these reminders can also be dynamic, right? So it's not like you're going to just have a couple of reminders that get sent. You can have lots of reminders that get sent, and depending upon how far they are out when that process starts, as they get closer and closer to the deadline, we want that frequency to increase, right? To create that sense of urgency, right? That they need to take care of these items. So as a part of our process, as time goes on and as they get closer and closer, right, we want to ramp up those communications accordingly. Just kind of a final thing here before I show you an example of what these reminder emails can look like. You can definitely include things like the custom item status, again those individual deadlines and even the item messages. And so let's take a quick look here at one of those onboarding reminders. So you can see here it looks very very similar, some similar components to the way that that initial email looked. We're able to display the table, we're able to display the instructions, and just kind of, I just kind of want to, I guess, point out or kind of make sure that you see it here, that health insurance item where we said that additional info is needed, that personalized message that we sent as a part of the email, we can actually display here as well. So just to give them an idea, right? Was it the back of my card that I didn't upload, or was it a missing signature on the form? What was it that was missing, that actually needs my attention? So obviously, depending upon the school, depending upon, what's a part of your onboarding process, you may only have a few onboarding items, or you may have a lot of them. So no matter how big or small those lists are, as you work through those items and as things come in and you kind of check them off the list and you say that they are complete, eventually once they all become complete or waived, the following things are going to happen as a part of this onboarding process. So eventually that onboarding status is going to get set to items complete, right? So as we started the process, it was set to pending. That's how we know that they are still actively involved in that process. But once everything's done, we're going to set that to items complete. We're also going to update that items not completed field, right? That counter field. And that's going to be set to 0, right? To just indicate that, yes, they've completed all their items and nothing else is needed. We're also going to dynamically set the items completed date to today's date. And we're also going to send out an onboarding complete notification. That's just kind of a good thing that we think is just handy for the student to see, right? Just kind of getting that final validation that everything that we said that they needed to do has been done. Obviously, that communication can look different from school to school. A lot of times it's just, a simple kind of confirmation that everything is in order. Sometimes there may be reminders in there about, the start date or, upcoming things that they need to be aware of. And that's truly kind of a school by school kind of individualized message that occurs there. But we think that that's an important piece of it. I think at this point, we want to kind of segue into kind of a bit of the question and answer period. And I think Ashley, are there any questions out there that people have posed?
None in the chat box, but feel free to type in your questions or come off mute and ask your questions if you'd like.
Yeah, and please don't be shy, folks. Looks like Micah put in the chat. He said he joined late. Will the recording be shared? Yes, it will be shared after the session is over.
Any other questions?
This is sorry, this is Ian. I did have a quick question. When you guys did if you had like something that you did that needed additional information on your dashboard, and it was marked that it needed to have additional information, the information it would trigger an email to go back to the student notifying that it needed more information. Student would update that information. Once they update that, it goes back for review. If it's still not valid, does it then go back to, or can you mark it again for needs more additional information, or is there another status besides needs additional information that you would potentially?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and yes, we definitely anticipated that need. The way that we had it configured in these environments currently, for a couple schools that we've done this for, we've actually set it up so that every time that block at the bottom of the supplemental information submission, where you set the personalization message, every time that personalization message gets updated, it would trigger a new email to the student. So if for some reason they submitted something and it still wasn't right, in that scenario, you could just go in and say, hey, I'm sorry, but unfortunately the item that you just submitted, and it would essentially re-trigger another email communication to them.
Okay. What if, again, can you just, I'm just curious, we've seen scenarios where the student just doesn't have that information at all. I mean, is this something we can just reject altogether? Would that trigger then, something else in the system where you could essentially reevaluate, where that person stands as far as whatever they're deciding they wanted to major in? Is that something that would be done, or is that
yeah, no, yeah, you could absolutely create another status for that, right? You can create a rejected status, or doesn't meet the criteria status, or something along those lines, and create some additional processing around that. For one of the schools that I worked with, they were they're a medical school, so they had lots of granular things that they wanted to do, which I'm not sure if you kind of picked up on in some of the screenshots that I shared, but they actually had a submission status detail field, which kind of detailed whether or not things met the criteria or didn't meet the criteria. So sometimes those items were marked as being completed, but internally they marked that, like for a drug screen or something, right? They had to take their drug screen, but it came back with a failure, or they had to submit for a background check, and the background check came back, right? So the item is technically complete, but it came back with criminal discrepancies, or it came back with something on it, right? So they needed to detail something further about, in addition to whether it's just completed or not completed or needs more information, right? So we actually created an additional field where they can track some of that extra layer of information. But yeah, certainly, I think this is definitely expandable. You don't necessarily have to stay with those couple of statuses that we threw out there. You could certainly expand it depending upon your use case.
Sure, thanks.
Great question, Ian. And good to hear from you again, sir. It's been a little while.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you, Ian.
Anyone else?
Anybody else?
Don't be shy.
Hey, Casey, this is Ron at
Hey, Ron.
PGCC. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. Is that we've worked with Casey to implement this solution at our college. And for us, we're a community college. So unlike the example given, for us, the admissions process is pretty much fill out your application and you are admitted to the college. But as was indicated, there are still a number of steps between admission and matriculation that a student has to go through. And working with Casey and the team, we built out our onboarding process just like this, utilizing both information that students submit through us through upload, or information that we are reading from the SIS or other sources to indicate when students have completed the items. And all I want to say is this has transformed how we are communicating and engaging with our students really on a personal level, so that it's no longer detective work for staff or students, which steps they've completed or which steps are remaining, what they still have to do. And I just want to say good work and thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. Yeah, it's one piece that wasn't able to quite work into the presentation, but Ron hit on it, and I'm so glad that you said it. We actually did develop a bit of a custom import process where certain things were being tracked in their SIS system, depending upon whether or not someone had completed new student orientation or whether they had logged into their student account, right? So certain items that they wanted to see, has the student kind of progressed, right? So we were able to kind of get an extract from their student information system, and by matching up on their ERP ID, we were able to go in and kind of find those items and essentially check them off to show that they were completed. So you can kind of think about this in a couple of different ways. You can think about this in terms of the things that the student particularly needs to do, but in some cases, especially with PGCC, like you mentioned, Ron, like sometimes these are just steps that we want the student to take. We want to make sure that they've set up an appointment with an advisor, or that they've actually successfully logged into their email account or something like that, right? So sometimes these can just be more like checklist items as you're moving towards enrollment versus versus necessarily, just a list of documents that need to be submitted. So I think there's a lot of use cases for something like this. And so, kind of put on your creative hat and think about kind of what makes sense for you and your institution. But I think you could use this in a number of different ways. But thanks again for that, Ron. That was great. Anybody else? Kind of show off as a part of this onboarding process. Again, I've kind of configured this process for a couple of different institutions, different institution types. Some have been community colleges, some have been larger schools, even a medical school, right? So some very different scenarios in which this process has been implemented. And in every case, it seemed to be really, really helpful for them. So I hope that today really just kind of demonstrated a little bit about how we can think outside of the box and have some creative solutions, to help us meet some of the needs that we have, how we can leverage and kind of extend functionality that exists today to do some kind of creative and cool things. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that it kind of spurs some ideas and some creativity on your side. If anyone is interested in hearing more or having more discussions, we certainly encourage you to kind of reach out. We'd love to talk with you about this process and how we could help you in this journey, if that's what you would like to do. We also want to make sure that you all stay connected to what's going on here at Ferrilli. We do host webinars and things from time to time with a lot of great content. And so I would just kind of encourage you all to kind of come out to our What's Happening page, just to kind of keep up to date on news and different events and webinars and things like that we're doing and hosting. And lastly, for any information on services or ways that we can help, you can always contact us at info@ferrilli.com or our 1-800 number, and we would be happy to help you. So again, on behalf of Ferrilli and everyone here at the company, certainly hope that you enjoyed this webinar and hope that it caused you to think a little bit and maybe get some creative ideas of how we can serve students a little bit better as we work with them in that nice kind of post-admit stage. So hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.